So last week, it seemed like the book of Genesis had this happily ever after story. Joseph and his brothers have been fully reconciled. Jacob's family now resides comfortably in Egypt. And the Israelites seem to have achieved most favored immigrant status. The Egyptians have been welcoming Hebrew foreigners from Canaan because they were family to Joseph. And Joseph, who despite being a non-Egyptian native, had risen to number 2 in power, just below Pharaoh. But here comes the transition from happily ever after to the reality. The reality is this story takes an ominous turn very quickly, and it starts with the words that Donna read this morning. Now a new king arose who did not know Joseph. Now that's code for one of two things. Now there's a new king who doesn't remember how Joseph saved the lives of all these people during this great 7 years of famine, or it means this king or this Pharaoh is simply choosing to ignore what is an important piece of Egyptian history. The new king says, look, the Israelite people are numerous and more powerful than me. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. And here's the only thing you need to know about that, about the king's assessment of the growing population and their appetite for power. It's a lie. It's not true. Simply not true. So why is the Pharaoh telling a bold-faced lie? Well, he's taking a page out of the authoritarian leader handbook here. He's singling out a relatively weak minority or outside group, labeling them enemies and trying to get everybody to be afraid of them. It is a time-tested strategy, an effective, albeit cynical way to unite people against a common enemy, which is, quite honestly, easier to do as a leader than to try to unite them around a shared vision of some collective future that includes everybody. But this Pharaoh is doing more than simply trying to consolidate power. He's also creating a diversion, a cover over some ruthless, increasingly ruthless behavior. First, he tries to crush these people by forcing them into labor to build 2 of his supply cities. And when that doesn't work, he commands the Hebrew midwives to kill all the Hebrew male babies as they're born. And when they refuse to carry out his orders, he commands all people to throw the newborn male babies into the Nile. This is a horrible story. And here's the great irony. Pharaoh is so hell-bent on killing boys, he neglects to see how the girls might disrupt and undermine his plans, which is, of course, what happens here. First, with the Hebrew midwives, whose vocation it is to preserve and protect life, on principle, they refuse to obey Pharaoh's command, despite the fact that he is the most powerful man in Egypt. And they perform the Bible's first act of civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance. But there are 2 other girls I want to lift up today for our consideration. 2 heroines who do not obey Pharaoh's orders and disrupt his plans. The first is Moses' big sister, and the second is his own daughter. And not only are they women, but they're young women. They're probably teenage girls. Why is that important? Well, women were underestimated, and so were the young. And I would say that's still true even today. So it's fair to say without these 2 teenage girls, there would be no Moses, there would be no Exodus, there would be no liberation of the people. Moses' big sister is sent by her mother to watch over Moses, who is put in a mini ark. There's a lot of symbolism, which I won't get into today. This papyrus basket, and placed in the Nile, and she's told, stand at a distance and see what happens to your brother, and then report back to me. Pharaoh's daughter, likewise, is sent to the river by her father. Basically said, go to the river and bathe and bring the servants with you. In essence, they are both told to go to the reeds on the bank of the river and then come home. Do as you're told. But as Anna Carter Florence puts it, each of them is willing to forego what they should do in order to do what they must. Something happens in the reeds. Something happens in that slippery place between land and water. In that in-between, liminal, slippery space, the kind of space where it's muddy and murky and it's hard to find your footing because you don't know, are you in shallow water or are you about to step into the deep water? It's a place where you could lose your balance and lose your footing and maybe never regain it. Something happens in the reeds. These two women, you can be sure, knew what they were supposed to do. But they didn't do it. They defied conventions. They crossed boundaries that had been created between them by others, and they worked together towards a shared vision. And in doing so, they become part of God's redemptive plan, one that will ultimately thwart the ruthless plans of an authoritarian leader who's in charge of Egypt. You can be sure the daughter of Pharaoh knew what she was supposed to do. When she discovered a Hebrew male baby floating down the Nile River, she was supposed to tip over the basket so that baby would die. Or at least push it a little further along the river to further her father's wishes, to further perhaps her nation's wishes. She knew what she was supposed to do. And you can be sure that Moses' big sister knew what she was supposed to do. If she witnessed someone finding the baby, even if it was an Egyptian, she was supposed to keep watching. She was supposed to stay in her hiding place, remain unseen so she wouldn't be caught. She was supposed to do nothing and then report everything that happened to her mother. She knew what she was supposed to do. Have you ever found yourself in the reeds with a clear sense of what you were supposed to do, but wondering, is it the right thing to do? Should I do it? Have you ever found yourself in that watery, slippery space, that muddy and murky space where you don't know anymore what you believe, and you're not sure you believe that anymore, but you don't yet know what it is that you do believe? It's a place that's uncomfortable. It's a place that challenges our opinions, our preconceived notions, our boxes, our black and white thinking. Have you ever been in the reeds? Maybe like these two women, you've been taught to fear them from the very youngest of ages, and then you met them, and they weren't like you expected. And you had a choice. Do I continue to believe that about them? Or do I reconsider and maybe think for myself? These are uncomfortable places to be. And yet, these are the places where God does God's best work. These are the places where something new and unforeseen and transformative can happen in our lives. The places where God's grace meets us where we are and doesn't leave us there. A place where God's grace moves us forward to God's vision for our lives and to be participants in God's redemptive plan. There's a lot we can learn from these two heroines. There's a lot we can learn from this Egyptian princess who says, "This must be one of the Hebrew children," and begins to think for herself, "My father fears this?" Imagine what this child's mother must have gone through, that this was her only choice. I don't want to participate in that, in this flood of hatred and fear. No. We can learn a lot from her. We can learn a lot from this Hebrew girl who asked a very simple question of an Egyptian princess, risked her life to ask it. Do you want me to find someone, a Hebrew woman, to nurse this child? And that question creates just enough space for something new to happen. And then as things unfolded, she started to wonder, can I trust this Egyptian woman? Does she have compassion? Is it worth speaking up right now to risk my life to save this child? Each of these women trusted a revelation that happened in the in-between space and gave voice to what was revealed. And in doing so, they devised this crazy plan to save this one precious child's life, a plan that their parents and those in authority would never have endorsed, but one which saved Moses' life, put him in the arms of his own mother for 3 years, and that eventually brought him into the palace. The halls of power. There's a lot we can learn from these two women. Number one, we can learn that you and I, we don't have to see the world the way we've been taught. No. You can honor your parents, you can love them, but you can also love them enough to see things differently than they do. And if you see things differently than your parents or some trusted authority figures, it may not mean you're blind. It may mean that you are now seeing their blind spots and choosing to not inherit those blind spots. It's important to remember that honoring your parents, honoring your tribe, your trusted authority figures does not mean breaking faith with your awakening heart. No, it doesn't mean that. You don't have to see the world the way you've been taught. That's point number one. Point number two is if you don't know what to do in that in-between space, you can begin by telling the truth about what you see. Sometimes that's the most radical thing we can do, is to tell the truth when no one else is telling the truth. And don't just say it to yourself, say it out loud. You know, I don't see it that way. And if you're interested in how I see it, I'll be happy to tell you how I see things. Lies are contagious. We see that every day, but so is the truth. The truth is contagious. And one truth, courageously spoken, calls forth another truth. And you never know who's listening. And you never know whose life will be changed, even saved by the truth that God has put upon your heart to speak. If you don't know what to do, you can start by telling the truth. And number three, sometimes you are the one God is waiting for. You. God may be calling you to the reeds, to that murky, muddy in-between space to challenge your opinions and to break through those boxes that you've created and invite you beyond simplistic black and white thinking, where you're not sure what you believe anymore and whether you agree with what you've been taught, and you will lose your balance in that place, but you may stumble upon the will of God for your life. A place where God is calling you to forego what you should do in order to do what you must. Sometimes you are the one God is waiting for. So what's going on in you as you think about these women? Are you being invited to the reeds? Is there something that you're wondering about, something that you had been taught about them or about life, and you don't know whether you believe that anymore, and you're wondering? Maybe it's something that challenges an idea that somebody you love has taught you, and you're wondering, I don't know that I believe that anymore. A place of unknowing, where you come to question some of the things that you've held. And will you trust God enough in the reeds with the unknowing, the uncertainty? Will you trust what's being revealed? Will you share that and speak it out loud? The Irish poet John O'Donohue wrote in his poem, A Morning Offering, which became his prayer, he says, "May my mind come alive today to the invisible geography that invites me to new frontiers. To break the dead shell of yesterdays, to risk being disturbed and changed. May I have the courage today to live the life that I would love, to postpone the dream no longer, but do at last what I came here for, and waste my heart on fear no more." How much time, how much energy do we waste on fear? Are you being invited to go to the reeds? You may be 70 years old, you may be 80 years old, you may be 90 years old. I'm done going to the reeds, Lord. No, maybe God is calling you to the reeds. Will you trust the wisdom that is offered there when your opinions are challenged, when your black and white thinking is challenged, when your path is interrupted, and when your heart is stirred? Will you trust the wisdom that is being offered today? For we learned together that God's liberation often starts with unlikely, underestimated people who defy conventions and cross boundaries that they're not supposed to cross, and are gifted with a crazy, God-inspired vision of reality and willing to share it out loud with others. Will you trust the invitation? And will you join me in silence? If you're comfortable, I invite you to close your eyes or just keep your eyes on the floor before you. And just stay for just a little bit in the reeds. And reflect on how you are coming to see things differently from your parents or your authority figures or your tribe. Stand in the reeds for just a little while. How are you staying faithful to your awakening heart? And is it possible that you are the one God is waiting for? Amen.